Today's Take 5 with the Saints, February the 28th, profiles two women, Anna Julia Haywood Cooper and Elizabeth Evelyn Wright, two African-American women of the early 20th century who were pioneers of education, first for their own education, achieving levels of education that were hardly known to African-Americans, let alone African-American women of their day and age, as well as creating educational opportunities for African-Americans. And in each of their own various ways, they were affiliated with the Episcopal Church. Anna Haywood Cooper, who actually was an Episcopalian, Elizabeth Wright, who founded a school in South Carolina that ultimately became an Episcopal-affiliated university later in life. So our feast day today, with our reading that goes with it, comes out of Luke chapter 4, verses 14 through 21. Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread through all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." This proclamation of release to the captives came very much in the form of education for these two women. Anna Haywood was born in 1859, born to a slave whose father also happened to be the master of her mother. But she was afforded, following the Civil War, an opportunity to attend St. Augustine Normal School and Collegiate Institute in North Carolina, an institute that was founded to educate and train African-American teachers and clergy. So the education bug was strong in her early on in life, not just receiving it, but also the urge to be able to teach and bring it to others. She became an Episcopalian during this time as one of her instructors, George Cooper, became her husband. George Cooper was, in fact, the second African-American man to be ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church in North Carolina. But her marriage to Cooper did not last long. At the age of 20 in 1879, Cooper died, and becoming a widow, Anna Haywood Cooper began to pursue her own education once again, attending Oberlin College, and then ultimately, upon graduating there, becoming assigned as the principal of an African-American high school in Washington, D.C. She served there faithfully for many years, but was denied reappointment because she would refuse to allow the educational standards of the school to be lowered, under pressure both from within her own school, from people who thought she was too rigorous, and from outside, who people thought simply that African Americans should not have or did not need the same standards of education as white people. She moved on from there after her reappointment was denied, and founded and became part of the Colored Women's League and the first Colored Settlement House in Washington, D.C. During this time, she began to write and became known as perhaps, if not the very first, one of the first leading voices of black feminism in the early 20th century, speaking of the power of the African-American woman to achieve whatever it is her heart desires. A very novel and somewhat dangerous thing for her to do in that day and age, but she continued to push forward, and later on, at the age of 65, she achieved a PhD from the Sorbonne in Paris, and later, from 1930 to 1942, from the ages of 70 to 82, she served as president of Frelinghuysen University, dying at the age of 104, where she was buried back at where she started her educational journey at St. Augustine School. Elizabeth Evelyn Wright was born in 1872 in Georgia. Her father was African American. Her mother was of Cherokee descent. She eventually enrolled at the now famous Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, but ultimately had to work during the day, take night classes, but ultimately decided to take a break from her studies to move to Hampton County, South Carolina, where she established a school for rural black children. Unfortunately, on more than one occasion, arsonists torched her school, and ultimately she wound up going back to Tuskegee, finishing her degree and graduating in 1894. She returned to Hampton County, where again these efforts were thwarted, but she moved to Denmark, South Carolina in 1897, which is where she started a school modeled after Tuskegee called the Denmark Industrial Institute, which today is now known as Voorhees College, named after one of the benefactors who helped her start this, who, by the way, was a prominent Episcopalian, and to this day Voorhees remains an Episcopal-affiliated university. In their struggle to continue to push for the education standards of their own people and for making sure that they as well received high-quality education, we remember Anna Cooper and Elizabeth Wright this day, and they work both within the larger society but also contributing to the work and to the Episcopal Church in helping to make sure that the Episcopal Church was able in their own small way to take a stand in favor of expanding these rights and helping to empower the poor and the oppressed with the might of education. Thanks for joining me. Look forward to our next Saint of the Day tomorrow with you. Take care, and I'll see you then.